Welcome back. Let's talk about nausea and vomiting. What helped me during my morning sickness? Let's be real. I had nausea and vomiting up until about 24 weeks of pregnancy. I am now 31 weeks, almost 32 weeks, and it was not fun, especially being an OBGYN. Felt a little bit disrespected by this baby because I know why all these things happen, but I was in my mind, didn't think I would actually experience all the things. You all know that in my videos, I like to start off with a little bit of background and explaining the subject, and then I'll talk about what worked for me. So we're gonna do some etiology of what causes nausea and vomiting of pregnancy. I will go over risk factors. We're gonna talk about some of the psychosocial aspects that come with nausea and vomiting, and then I'll share my personal experience and what worked for me. So let's jump right in. So brief background on nausea and vomiting, it is actually very, very common, and we see it in about 50 to 80% of pregnancies. Women struggle with morning sickness. Fun fact, it is called morning sickness, but it doesn't necessarily mean it only happens in the morning. For me specifically, I got most of my nausea at night or in the middle of the day. It's just more commonly seen early in the morning, which is why I got that nickname. Now, the etiology of what actually causes the nausea and vomiting, there's no concrete 100% proven fact of what causes nausea and vomiting, but there are three running theories that we have. One is going to be hormone stimulation, two is going to be an evolutionary adaptation, three is going to be a psychological predisposition. So what do we mean by hormone stimulation? This is going to be referring to a hormone called HCG, also known as human chorionic gonadotropin. This hormone is what's known as the pregnancy hormone, and it is a hormone that starts to rise fairly quickly early on in pregnancy. By about week 11 to 12, it starts to kind of taper down as the placenta matures, and then the placental hormones are the ones that support the pregnancy. But HCG is supporting the pregnancy in the first trimester, or at least one of the hormones that's supporting the pregnancy. There have been studies that show that with the increase in HCG, you see worsening nausea and vomiting. So in situations where we might have a higher level of HCG, the nausea and vomiting usually gets worse. Situations like a twin pregnancy. You have more HCG in twin pregnancies or triplets or multiple, so usually these patients are going to be the ones that have a more severe form of nausea and vomiting in pregnancy. Another condition would be a molar pregnancy. Molar pregnancies are abnormal pregnancies and they make an insane amount of HCG, and usually these patients have a lot of nausea and vomiting. If you want more info on molar pregnancies, I actually have an entire blog post explaining what they are, so I'm going to leave that link down below. Another hormone that can play into this is estrogen. Estrogen increases as the pregnancy increases. And there is a link between higher levels of estrogen and nausea. Surprisingly, one of the side effects of birth control or hormonal birth control, like a birth control pill, is nausea, and that is associated with the estrogen that's actually in the pill. That's another hormone correlation with the nausea. Let me hit you with a really fun fact. Cigarettes are associated with a decrease in HCG and a decrease in estrogen. So people who are smokers actually have less nausea and vomiting. Now, I'm not saying this like pick up smoking if you're dealing with nausea and vomiting, because it's not good. I do not recommend smoking for any reason at all. But it is interesting that that correlation has been found, which again ties into the fact of why smoking during pregnancy can actually have bad outcomes in the pregnancy, because the cigarette and the products and chemicals within cigarettes can actually affect hormone levels and change stuff within the pregnancy. But I still thought it was a fun little fact to throw in. Now let's talk about the evolutionary adaptation. This is a theory from an evolutionary standpoint that the nausea and vomiting in pregnancy is actually protecting the woman and her fetus from any harmful or potentially dangerous foods. This might also explain why some people have food aversions early on in pregnancies to things that could be harmful to the pregnancy, or they might become more sensitive to certain smells, because from an evolutionary standpoint, your body knows in order to protect the growing fetus, you shouldn't be consuming it. I don't know, I think that's pretty cool. And let's talk about the psychological predisposition. Now, this is an area that's still being heavily studied, and we definitely need more research to really have a good foundation and understanding of why this might be. But there has been a correlation between some psychiatric conditions and mental health conditions where they can be associated with an increase in nausea and vomiting in pregnancy. Really looking forward to more research being poured into this, because that's really going to help us better understand how to treat the patients that are dealing with nausea and vomiting when there is a correlation with, say, depression or maybe bipolar or anxiety. So I'm excited to see where this new research is going to take us. Another fun little fact, did you know that if you start taking a prenatal vitamin at least 1 month before you become pregnant, it may actually help decrease the nausea and vomiting throughout the pregnancy? So I encourage you, if you are actively trying to conceive, start taking your prenatal vitamin. It's very beneficial to the baby and the growing, developing fetus, but hey, this is also a bonus. Now, it may not always work. I started taking a prenatal vitamin about 2 months before we started trying to conceive, and I still got nausea and vomiting. So it's not gonna work for everyone, but it's not gonna hurt to do it either. Let's talk about risk factors. Like I mentioned earlier, a risk factor for nausea and vomiting is gonna be multiples or a higher order gestation, like twins, triplets, quadruplets, or even more pregnancy hormone, more risk of nausea. Same thing with molar pregnancies. Another thing is actually if you have a history of motion sickness, which kind of goes with me. I have terrible motion sickness when it comes to boats and the ocean. Not so bad on airplanes, I'll get it every now and then, but I cannot be, unless I'm swimming, I just can't be on a body of water. I get so motion sick. So I think that may be why my nausea and vomiting was so bad, but that's a risk factor. If you have a history of migraines, you can also be at risk for nausea during pregnancy. If you have a family history of nausea and vomiting, so say your mom and sister had hyperemesis or really bad vomiting during pregnancy, you might be at an increased risk as well. Now, does the nausea and vomiting in pregnancy actually affect the developing fetus? Now, in mild or moderate cases of nausea and vomiting, it actually has no effect to the baby, which is good. I know it can seem scary, especially if you're throwing up every day. We obviously want you to keep eating, so if you get to a point where you can't eat or drink anything and all you do is vomit, that's abnormal. But if you're still able to consume something throughout the pregnancy, then that's okay. And it has little effect on the fetus. Actually, women who have nausea and vomiting throughout the pregnancy actually have a lower incidence of miscarriage. Sounds crazy. Now, I don't want you to think that if you don't have nausea and vomiting, that you're going to miscarry. I'm just saying that if you do, kind of try and trick yourself into thinking it's a good thing that you have nausea and vomiting, because then that means your pregnancy is developing normally and the chance of miscarriage is lower. Now let's talk about treatment options for nausea and vomiting in pregnancy. First thing of treatment, like most things in medicine, is going to be lifestyle changes. So making changes to your diet, what you're eating, avoiding triggers, stuff like that. Other forms of treatment are going to be medications. These can range from over-the-counter medications or things that can be prescribed by your doctor. As I mentioned before, if you're at the point where you are just vomiting nonstop, you can't drink water, you can't keep anything down, that's abnormal, and I encourage you to go to the ER for an evaluation. You may need to be on electrolytes, on fluids. You might need to be admitted just for monitoring. So if you ever have any doubts, either call your doctor or just go in. I'd rather you go in and be taken care of than something happen. Now let's talk about what worked for me. I definitely started with my dietary changes, and I could pinpoint also triggers for me. For me personally, it was more like textures of foods that grossed me out. So for example, I used to really like cottage cheese, but then in the first trimester, the thought of even cottage cheese being around me was disgusting, so I avoided it. Then I tried some other things. Ginger is a really good anti-emetic. That's natural. Anti-emetic is anti-nausea. So I did a lot of ginger teas where you can boil just a little thumb of ginger with some lemon and honey and drink that. That kind of helped. I think that was more also like a psychological thing, like tricking myself that it was making me feel better, but it did somewhat work. Also lemon. So if you have lemon chews that you can buy over the counter, or like the sour candies, that tends to help. And then there's ginger chews that you can buy too. Again, these weren't completely foolproof. They worked okay the first couple weeks, and then it just didn't do anything. For the counter medications that you can try are vitamin B6, and you can also do Unisom. I tried both of these. Honestly, with the B6, I didn't even notice a difference. And the Unisom is really just a sleep aid, so it would make me sleepy. So did it work? Yes, because it knocked me out, but I didn't like the feeling of waking up groggy. It just wasn't worth it to me, so I didn't love it. So again, I probably took it like 3 days and I was like, we're done. This is not worth it. Other medications that I tried, I had my doctor prescribe me Zofran. Now, me personally, I did not start Zofran until the second trimester just because of some increased risk of use in the first trimester. It's not that you can't use it, it's just not first line. So I opted to wait until the second trimester to start Zofran. Again, I probably took this 2 or 3 times, didn't even notice a difference, did not touch my nausea and vomiting. I was still puking every single day. So I said, why am I gonna keep taking it if it's not working? So I didn't take it for very long. Other medication I tried is Phenergan, and Phenergan has the same side effect as Unisom, that it can make you drowsy. And I'm just really sensitive, I think, to like those type of medications because it knocked me out. And I didn't like the feeling of like waking up groggy and like a zombie, and I still had to work, and all I wanted to do was like lounge, and so it didn't work for me. I'm telling you, this baby really put me through it. This baby said, you're an OBGYN, I'm gonna teach you everything. Which is great. Now I can relate to you all a whole lot better. The nausea and vomiting is on another level and it sucks. I've been there for 24 weeks. I would say one of the things that really helped me with the nausea and vomiting was frequent snacking. Now, this was hard for me in the beginning because I'm not a snacker by nature. I really was just like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and like maybe the occasional snack. But I would go like prior to pregnancy, I would go hours without eating. Sometimes I wouldn't even eat breakfast, and I would just have coffee. With the pregnancy, that is not okay. And truly, eating every 2 to 3 hours did help. Now, I don't mean I ate like a big meal. It was like I had my breakfast, 2 or 3 hours would go by, and then I had an apple, or I had carrots and celery dipped in ranch or peanut butter, or just something so that I didn't have an empty stomach for like 8 hours at a time like I used to do before. So I definitely encourage you to try that and see if that helps. Another thing, not overeating. This was a big one for me because I tend by nature to probably overeat if it's in front of me. It's like when you go to a restaurant and there's chips and salsa, I'm gonna continue to eat chips and salsa unless someone takes them away from me. It was that mentality where prior to pregnancy, yeah, you would feel really full, but you'd get over it. If I got to that feeling of being really, really full, it was so uncomfortable that I would just trigger my nausea and I would need to vomit and throw it all up. So not overeating and listening to my body, or just looking at it and be like, you know what, let me take a break. Let me see if I don't eat anything for 10 minutes. If I'm still hungry, I'll keep eating, but if I feel full, then we stop. Like I mentioned before, avoiding foods that were really like textury or had a weird texture to them was super important. So I actually ate a lot of like soft serve yogurt, a lot of Greek yogurt, a lot of ice cream. Like that type of food is what I really craved and actually could tolerate. So I ate a lot of that in the first trimester, but things that had like more spiciness to it or more flavorful or just like interesting textures and stuff, I could not stomach that at all. So listen to your body and see what works for you. And it may be something where you have to do trial and error, but I hope that you just find what works for you. Ultimately though, like I mentioned before, I still struggled with nausea and vomiting every single day until 24 weeks of pregnancy. Then at 24 weeks, it was like something went off and it went away and it was great. Now I am almost 32 weeks, and probably like 4 days ago, I had a random day where the nausea hit me, I threw up, I felt terrible, but the next day I felt fine. So who knows what's going on. But ultimately, I really just had to kind of suck it up because so much wasn't working. Over-the-counter medications didn't work, the prescription medications didn't work. Sure, the overeating, like that helped, the snacking helped, but ultimately, I really just had to suck it up and remind myself that the pregnancy was healthy, that overall I'm still able to drink water, I'm still able to eat something. And while it wasn't fun, I'm glad to be done with it. A lot of it was just a mental game, and I really had to push myself through it. I leaned a lot on my husband, and just if I felt crappy, I would just verbalize it. I called my mom a lot. I talked to my sisters, my friends, and it was nice to just lean on someone and in a community where I could just safely vent and be like, this sucks. But I'm glad I feel so much better now, and I hope if you're watching this video that you find some of these tips helpful, but know and keep reminding yourself that all of this is temporary and it's not going to be the rest of your life. I promise. I hope you guys found this video helpful. Let me know in the comments how long you guys had nausea and vomiting. I hope someone can relate to this and find this video helpful. All right, you guys, I hope you have an amazing week. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for all the support and for being here, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.